you like that black effect?
My name is Marcus Kiser. I'm a designer, illustrator, creative director for Mind Design. I'm most of my artwork is it stems around community engagement and social justice for Black spaces, and I am 1/3 of the exhibit that is called Intergalactic. So, Jason.
Yeah, Jason Woodberry. I'm a creator. That's probably the best way to put it. Illustration, graphics, whatever's needed to tell the narrative. My artwork basically revolves around. It bases on the theme of Afrofuturism, but it revolves around ways to talk about things along the lines of social injustice, social and political issues, just through the use of visual arts. I guess that's probably the best way to put it. But it's three-dimensional sculptures. By day, I'm a software engineer for Disney Plus. That's it.
What's up, everybody? Q here, Quentin Talley, and also a creative. Do multiple things: producer, actor, poet, and I do the musical narration for Intergalactic Soul. And my day job, I'm program director here at Hayti Heritage Center. And I also have a theater company, On Q Productions, in Charlotte, but I'm in Durham with Hayti for the day job.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for sharing a little bit about yourselves so that everybody on the call has a better understanding of who you all are. So like I said, I'm just going to sort of let you all go. You know, we want this to be something organic where you all share your process, when you all share, you know, sort of the thinking behind creating the exhibit to give these folks a bit of a, like I said, behind the scenes snapshot of how this all came to be.
So Intergalactic Soul started back in 2014 in response to the Mike Brown shootings in Ferguson, Missouri. Pretty much, you know, Jason and I just kind of, actually, it was an argument on Facebook. And there was this guy like just trolling my Facebook page about Mike Brown and he, you know, he was just talking about how he was a thug and how he deserved it. And he was using all of these wild terms like, you know, how he was saying things like, come on, you know how inner city people are and you know how those people are, kind of using terms like that. And I remember going to sleep, falling asleep and waking up with maybe like 200 comments on my Facebook, on that Facebook post. And I remember Q kind of like created this poem, and Q, correct me, I think it was called Red Summer, or it's not like Red August or something like that.
Yeah, Red Summer. Yep.
And from that, like Jason and I just started creating. We didn't even have a title for the show. We didn't have, you know, we didn't even have a space to show it. But we kind of just started creating this Afrofuturistic work that revolved around these two Black kids traveling through the universe and kind of encountering these social and racial issues during their journey. And I think the show, like, it actually, we made, like, there were two pieces that Jason and I made. And they actually debuted in Art Basel in Miami. It was a show called Cosmic Connections. And, you know, I didn't even think we would really get in. They were like, it was like all these dope artists from around the world. Chinese artists, Wei Wei was in it. You know, he was at one point, Wei Wei was one of the most dangerous artists in the world because of his political views and like the things he spoke out on in China. But we had these two pieces in the same virtual, it was a digital exhibit with him. So then from there, we, you know, Q was just kind of looking at this stuff and he was like, you know, like I gotta write to that. Like, and then we ended up debuting at the Gantt the following year, like 2015. And from there, you know, it's been It's been to the Gant, Miami, out in Portland, thanks to brother Luke. Miami twice, I think, and then various universities and things like that. So that's pretty much the background and how it started. Jason, let me know if I'm missing anything or leaving anything out. But one thing in like creating the show, so I have a background in digital design, graphic design. We wanted to make this like a multimedia exhibit and just kind of utilize, every piece of creativity we could, everything from 3D printing to music to the satirical ad campaigns to digital illustration to, we've even bounced out into like the public art realm and augmented reality because I didn't want to leave no stone unturned when it came to like these messages we were putting out because I felt like this stuff was important. So, like it's been like this is 2014, now we're in 2021. It's been like six or 7 years since we've been like just traveling the show and growing it and, adding all of these elements to it. So that's pretty much like the background of like how everything started. Jason, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, on top of that too, like going to what you were saying earlier about like leaving no stone unturned. My background, I'm a web developer for the most part. And much of that is like self-taught. But it was a matter of having a sense of imagination and fearlessness when it comes to taking on these like different mediums. That's why I use the term like creative, because I'm not necessarily or nor is Marcus or any of us for that most part, approaching things like, okay, I need to paint this because I'm a painter. It's like, no, whatever I have to do to get this message out, because through our background, like our outside of art, we've had experience in marketing. Like Marcus and I, we work for firms and whatnot, and we saw how companies will take a product, they'll put a message around this product, obey your thirst. And then they brand that product, they brand that message to the point where it becomes second nature. It's just something that you say, you see something and you associate, one thing next to it. So it's kind of like the same approach is that like, we took this message about, equality and, about having like a voice, about, living without fear. And the art is pretty much just a byproduct of that message, where it's just like whatever we need to do in order to just put this message out here. Like, so if it has to be augmented reality, if that's one way to get people more engaged, to interact with it, then that's something that we do. And that's I think that's really important when it comes to art. And I don't mean anything when I say this, but when it comes to when you're creating something that isn't necessarily self-serving, the idea is like, it's not about like what makes me look good or like what is it that's going to allow me to flex my skills. It's more along the lines of like, okay, like how do I say this? How do I put this out there? And with Intergalactic Soul, the goal was never necessarily to get into like a fine arts gallery. Like that was never the point. It was like, we're just going to create because we're creatives and that's what we do. If you give me a pen and a napkin, I'm going to draw something, I'm going to create something. Like if I don't create, that's almost like starving myself. So the idea was simply just to create. And with us creating while also feeding the community, we found sustainability in the community. Like the focus isn't building a brand, the focus is building a community, because the community will never fail you. Your brand can, if it's just about the brand, like things go in and out, trends go in and out. Intergalactic Soul was cool back then because, people were into like futuristic astronauts and stuff. And now it's not, it's like, no, like the community won't let it fall because it's for them. They're directly involved and a part of this just as much as we are, and that's kind of like the importance in what we do as artists, because we feel as like I personally believe if you're a Black creative, you do not have the luxury to be self-serving. That's just a simple luxury. You can't do that. You can't simply say like, oh, I'm just going to create this because I want to do this for myself. Like, you can say that. You can by all means. However, there's so much to touch on, and there's so many people who don't have the talents or don't have the resources and don't have the platform to say something. So it's on you to that, like when you have these talents, when you have these gifts, to allow yourself to serve and serving, like what I mean by serving your community, or whatever cause that you feel is needs to be addressed. It's just so happened, we grew up as Black men, so this is what we know, and this is what we address. And there's a lot in the world that needs to change, but you got charity starts at home. So, Q.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of Marcus and Jason, like Marcus said earlier, I got into the project just by happenstance. Really, I saw Marcus post the image, and he posted another image, and I was like, "Yo, what's going on?" I don't know what's happening, but I want to be a part of it. And it just sparked creativity in myself as a writer. Just looking at the images, not even knowing the story, it just spoke to me. And then once Jason and Marcus laid out the story, it really spoke to me about all of the different Black artists, musicians, creatives who have really focused on Afrofuturism, from Sun Ra to Nina Simone to James Brown in his own way, and really took those influences and started a narration for the project. And it took me a while to get everything together, because Marcus and Jason will tell you it took me forever, like until last year, to figure out who the hell was Pluto and who was Astro. So in theater terms, it takes theater and music. It takes a while to develop a show. So over the past couple of years, we've been able to perform myself in the band, like at an opening night or a workshop here and there. And then last year was our first run of a show, actually doing the full show. We did it last February, right before the pandemic hit, actually. So it really gave us a chance to work out some kinks, and we released the single back in the summer, and hopefully the album will be done hopefully by this summer. So yeah, that's been my part in Intergalactic so far, and how I got started.
I did have a question that came up for me. Q, you mentioned, just seeing the work, like just seeing the art on social media and just wanting to be involved, right? Like being intrigued by that. And so
Yeah.
My question for you, we have some young artists here on the call, some that I know personally. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about, like, what would you say to young artists or creators that feel drawn to someone else's work but don't really know, like, how to get involved or if they should reach out? Like, what advice would you give to them?
Always reach out. I always say, always reach out. Different artists are funny about different things, but most artists that I know are hella cool, and will usually get back to you in some form or fashion. And you can kind of figure out whether whether they vibe with you and you're cool enough to work with. And then some artists are just straight up assholes. You wouldn't want to work with them anyway. But always take that chance and reach out. I've built a career on reaching out to artists, or this institution, or this executive, because they're always looking for stuff. And at least they have you on their radar. If you send them, if you're inspired by their work, and vice versa. Just send them a note. Always reach out.
Can I add something to that?
Oh yeah.
So like to your to that point too, as far as reaching out, like I still at this point reach out to artists. Like there's artists that I see on Instagram, whether and it's not even necessarily like the same medium. It could be a photographer, it could be, a performer or something along the lines of that. And, at times, sometimes it's just like, hey, I just think your stuff is dope. Like, I don't want anything from you. I don't want any information from you. I just want to say, like, I want to like write out, not just hit a like button, but I just want to let you know, like, your stuff is dope and what you do is necessary. And I appreciate what you do. Like it's cool to be able to be a fan of things just as much as being a creator. And I think that's important too. Like, it's when you are like kind of self-serving, you find yourself in these very, very like high competitive moments where you feel like, oh, I gotta get ahead of this person, or I don't want to give props to this person because if me giving props to them is almost like me kind of like bowing to them or kissing their feet. When it's like really, it's like nah, like we're a community. We're community artists. We all trying to figure this thing out. And depending on your lane, like, there, all things being said, you may have commercial success tomorrow. You may never have commercial success, like, things along the lines of that. But I think just approaching people with a sense of sincerity, simply saying like, yo, I like your work. And then, it never hurts to ask questions. Like I credit much of my growth as an artist, not necessarily on me creating. Like I may have gotten better at technical things by, drawing more or understanding the program better or reading the book. But my growth as an artist, a lot of has came from talking to older artists, like artists that I appreciate. There's an artist by the name of Mark Greenfield. We did a residency with in 2016 when we were at the McCall. Mark Greenfield was a sketch artist for the LAPD. He quit his job there. He was a color artist for like Hanna-Barbera, for like Flintstones and the Jetsons cartoons. You know what I mean? Like he's done residencies in Brazil where he's like been with like, like African tribes, I guess to say, Afro-Brazilian tribes. Like, he's taken part in ceremonies. He's seen so many other things. And he knows so much more than me. I come to him with questions. I ask questions like, at any point in time, I'm always like, hey, look, if I'm asking too much, shoot me down. You know what I mean? But like for the most part, people are very, very open to having these conversations. And me having conversations with him and seeing his work and asking about his process, because he knows like I'm not into this just to like take his ideas or leech off him or anything like that. He almost looks at me and Mark as like art sons, at this point. So he's always like open with information and open with advice and just open with like wisdom and knowledge all in itself. Like there's like an African proverb that says like when the young ask when the young ask for knowledge from the elders, they get wisdom beyond their years. And it's this idea of like the things that I know now, I can't really say I would know at this point if I didn't, reach out to these artists, these like older artists, these more experienced artists, and and ask them questions. The worst thing they can say is like, leave me alone and you back where you started from. That's the worst that can happen. But again, the wealth of knowledge I got from Mark, and there's another gentleman by the name of Glexus. Glexus was a artist. He's actually he's an artist from Cuba. And when we were in residency, he came to our studio and he saw our work up, and our work was on like canvas and it was wrapped. And he asked us, he was like, he was telling us how much the artwork reminded him of like the protest posters from Afro-Cubans. And he was like, cause there's a lot of, there was a huge migration of Black Panthers to Cuba. And, he's looking at the work. He's like, why did you put it on canvas? And we were like, that's cause it looks cool. That's what you want in museums, right? Like you want like the one inch depth canvas that comes off the wall. So maybe you should put it on paper, because that's when they wanted to get a message out to people, they would print things on paper and like screen print it and then like put it up. And we were like, yo, that's dope. Absolutely. Like that makes perfect sense. But that's like, that's advice and the perspective that comes from someone, with that experience and with that knowledge, and that can see your work and what you do and kind of guide you a little bit. Not saying that you're doing it wrong, but it's like, hey, you know, you might be missing this part, or this may help your narrative or get your work out. So, long story short, like, ask away, unapologetically ask away.
I'll piggyback on that. Like, definitely agree with everything that Jason and Q said. I also want to make it known that, like, me and Q knew each other, so it's not like he was reaching out to like a stranger or anything. So me and Q go back like 20 years. So so I just want to, you know, it wasn't like he didn't like cold call me.
But I will say, like, even the cold call thing, it's an art to that, and there's a way of doing it, and the important is not to sound like you're opportunist. There's a photographer I reached out to. His name is Joshua. I'm gonna mess his last name up, but it's like Kasi. He's a photographer from Ghana, and right now he's like huge. He just did like a photo shoot for like Michael B. Jordan. He did like a shoot for Kamala Harris. He's like just blew up. The matter of fact, he's had a shoot in the past 2 GQ magazines, and I just reached out to him and I was like, "Yo, man, I think your stuff is dope. I think like, yo, your like use in your eye for color is like absolutely amazing." And I was like, you know, I'm sure the pictures are touched, but I was like, your pictures have a very like organic appeal to them, despite that these are like fashion photos, so they're generally kind of like touched and things. But I was like, yo, like, I just want to say I think your stuff is dope. I don't. There's nothing else I want. You know what I mean? And then I was just kind of like did it, not even really expecting him to respond so much. Just like, yo, I just want to give you encouragement, because just because you have this level of success doesn't mean that you don't need to hear that. You know, he may just need to hear that. So with that being said, though, he reached back out and he was like, yo, like, appreciate it. Like, you know, he asked about like one of my pieces, like, yo, what is this about? And then that started the conversation. And then from there, we kind of like chat on and off here and there. You know, it's, I don't know. It's sometimes it just, you know, it just happens, you know, but it's definitely an art to the cold call, DM or email. You know, you just want to sound human. You know, like, hello, Mr. Woodberry. I just want to really thank you. This, like, that's not like, like, you're talking to artists. If you're applying for a job at Wells Fargo, then yeah, that's maybe how you want to come off. But like, you know, you're talking to artists, and it's like, hey, what's up? Like, the more human and yourself and personal you sound, the further you'll get, and the more sincere it sounds.
So I know this was my fault. We hit a hard left. So to loop us back around, I had a couple of questions from Corey about the exhibit itself. Can you all talk a little bit more about the characters in the exhibit and how you created them?
Go ahead, Marcus.
So pretty much there's 2 main characters in the exhibit. There's Astro and Pluto. They're 2 young Black boys. I created Pluto. He's like a young astronaut. Astro is created by Jason, who is like not from this world. But and this goes back to like so I'm like a huge fiction nerd. So the way we pretty much introduced this whole comic book sequential storytelling to like a contemporary environment. So everything is kind of goes back off of like the love for like comic books, hip hop music, soul music, and just, you know, like environmental justice. So like whenever like creating this stuff, you know, we have like, it's pretty much a story, and when the show is up, we probably have there's probably about 60 pieces in all right now, maybe more than that. But when everything's up together and, you know, we have the band, it's pretty much just a sequential story of these 2 young characters just traveling, they're nonchalant, traveling the universe, encountering like these social and political issues. So when I created Pluto, I mean, I just took a bit of myself, and, you know, I was just thinking, you know, it's just hard back when I was like younger and like always imagining like what was in space, I wanted to be an astronomer when I was young, but like in we created these adventures for these two kids to have. And like in the story, there's like KKK aliens or aliens that resemble the KKK. There's like these Jim Crow robots, kind of just taking a bunch of things from like history and present day and then tying them into like this science fiction cosmic world. And so, it's just a crazy imagination that we came up with, even building spaceships and on like during the journey of these two characters, like they have there's a satirical posters and things, and as they go with this, is like this is the stuff that they're being fed by the media of them looking at being two young Black boys traveling through the galaxy. There's a hero called The Last Black Starfighter, which is kind of like the comic book and the cartoon that these kids look up to. There are all these like satirical ads with, grape soda, make America great again, and just all of this like wild stuff that these kids have to digest every day through their travels of the universe. And at the time when I can tell you one thing as far as like when I created those Jim Crow bots, so they have, of course, this is based off the Jim Crow era South, and they have like Confederate flags on the chest, and probably like around 2014 when we created this, there was that whole created Confederate flag thing going down in South Carolina, where they were trying to take the flag down from the Capitol. And I remember right before the show opened, me and Jason were out. We don't even drink. We were drinking like ginger ale or something, but like there's this lady, she came up there and she was like, aren't you guys glad that racism is dead? And we're like, it's like a white lady. And we're like, yeah, what do you mean by that? And she was like, yeah, they took the Confederate flag down in the Capitol. Like, that means racism is dead. And I was like, well, it goes a lot deeper than, but I don't think racism is dead. And then she kind of wanted a hug. She wanted us to hug her. And we were like, yo, like, we're not hugging you. Like, why do we need to hug you for something that's like wrong in the first, like it shouldn't have been flying in the first place. And she got so heated. And then she was like, I remember she said, Jason went and hugged her and she said that she hated Black people even more or something crazy like that. But she didn't even understand, like she didn't understand like the history of this stuff. And like a lot of this work is just based off of like, it's just us reimagining the future, but then we're taking like these elements from the past and kind of just creating this fictional story. And it could be, and like earlier, like when I mentioned, like, I just wanted to use as many different mediums as I could, because we could turn like, even with Q's involvement, it can be a theatrical performance. This could easily be a cartoon. This could easily be a comic book. This could easily be a mural series. It could easily be an art exhibit that's traveling. And like, I just wanted to take all of these things and like kind of show what it was like for these two young Black characters traveling through space. And so Pluto is pretty much, whenever you see the young Black kid that looks like with the astronaut helmet on, that's Pluto. And I came up with the name because, in astronomy, sometimes Pluto is considered a planet. Sometimes Pluto is not considered a planet, given what time period that we're in. I think right now, it's like, I think it's not considered a planet right now. But Pluto's like the furthest planet away. It gets the least amount of sunlight. It's the smallest planet. And just depending on like what time period we're in, is like often misunderstood. But then there's like, I think they just released like these new telescope images of it. And it's just like this beautiful mystery that's out there. And I kind of just wanted my, character to just be this young, gorgeous Black mystery that nobody understood. And people often get it wrong about like who he is and what he's about when he's traveling through space. So like that was Pluto. I'll let Jason talk about how he created Astro.
So Astro is the name in itself doesn't really have so much as a significance. But he's modeled after my son. When I came up with Astro, at the time my son may have been about 5. I want to say about 5 years old, something along the lines of that. So even the first piece that was in the art basel is, and it's actually on the site right now. It's the second piece, but it's called Dark Matter, and it's like, this little black kid blowing bubbles, and inside the bubbles is like the galaxy, and the concept is like he's creating like the universe, but in a manner that's very just like nonchalant. And I like, I look at, looking at my son, as well as like doing like community engagement with a lot of young black kids. There's like this perception that black children, like children that live in low income areas, because they're low income areas, they're not happy. And it's like, you would be amazed at the amount of joy that these kids find with just very little. But as well as like the things that they create with like nothing really, like they do it just so effortlessly, whether it's a dance, whether it's a song, no matter what, they just do it. And they do it free of judgment. They don't care what people think, and they just create. So, I mean, so many ways, like I see how like the black youth, like especially when it comes to like pop culture, right? Like, like hip hop is like the most influential form of music right now. You know what I mean? And like seeing the things in which they create, and watch it just sort of like blow up in this popularity. And then next thing you know, you have like Fortune 500 companies making commercials like has their music, or incorporates their dance. Fortnite incorporates their dances, and things like that. So like Astro, Astro in the sense, he's from outside of this galaxy per se. He's not from Earth, I'll say that much. And he links up with Pluto, and both of them travel the galaxy together, completely ignorant to like, what Jim Crow. They're not victims, but much like growing up, as a black. I remember my dad. I had a conversation with my dad last year, and he was telling me how like it was this corner store he used to love to go to, and this was in Marion, South Carolina. Mind you, there is no civil rights movement in South Carolina. So let's talk about that. But he was talking about this corner store he used to love going to after church. And, they always stop and get water. And he said, it didn't dawn on him until he was older that like he was drinking water from a hose from the back of the building. And like, it just never occurred. He just thought like, this is just what it is. This is just normal in a way. This is just how things are. I say that to say, like, I stress that like these kids in this narrative, they're not victims. And these things that they're coming across it for the first time. And you're seeing their reactions and how they counter it and how they confront it, all sort of take fold through like this narration, Intergalactic Soul. So that's pretty much the basis of it.
And I was gonna say my challenge was putting all of that together and trying to come up with a storyline. Because I kept going back to Jason and Marcus to like make sure I'm getting the storyline right. And it's kind of non-linear but linear at the same time. And I play, when we performed the show, I play Pluto, and Astro is kind of silent throughout the piece. And like Jason said, Astro comes to visit Pluto. Every June they vacation on the moon, and they go from there and steal their parent spaceship. And Astro takes Pluto to his side of the galaxy where everything's cool. And just trying to, put in those history lessons, and there's uh, a black doctor by the name of Ron Mallett, who's actually working on the theory for time travel. So he was he's considered the great great grandfather of Pluto. Once you learn at the end, you learn that at the end of the story, kind of how Pluto came to be. Um, so it and the other thing is that is I'm still creating because they're still creating pieces. Um, so I kind of stopped at a certain point right now, but um, like Marcus said earlier, you know, I'm sure there'll be different offshoots um, of the series because we got a whole Last Black Starfighter series. That's a whole thing within itself, and so on and so forth. So,
And lastly, just to kind of highlight, I think it's important too, and Marcus, you can chime in and Q if you like, is to define what is Afrofuturism, because there's that, because I mean it's a term that is thrown around that, like, a lot of things, and very much so, a lot of it is Afrofuturism, but you can easily like look at something and totally miss it being Afrofuturistic because it's not kids in spacesuits, or it's not an astronaut, or it's not like, there's no planets in the illustration, things like that. Marcus, do you wanna give like your 2 cents on what Afrofuturism is?
I mean, we all have Afrofuturism. I mean, it's different for certain people. For me, it's just about connecting. It's about telling the story of Black people in the future, while connecting those moments of the past. How do we get to the future? How do we foreshadow what the future looks like? And I think, for me as an artist, as a creative, I've always kind of drawn spaceships and comics, and but people, they put us in this box of Afrofuturism, but um, I think um, I think Chris Rock was like, for Black people, the future is always better. And I've always thought about, like, just from all the oppression, the history, even things that are going down now. I was just reading about this teenager that got slammed by a cop like last week. Um, it's the ability to dream, and it's almost like, if you look at this from a religious standpoint, the ability to have faith and knowing that everything's going to be okay. We were even talking, Jason and I were talking to some folks up at Duke last week, and even talking about imagining like the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, of like you being on a ship, being brought to the country, not knowing anything about where you're going, but even having the hope that one day, would be free, or like things wouldn't be that way, could also sort of be looked at as like Afrofuturism, dreaming about these better futures, but then still have this identity of like your past and who you are and what got you to this point. Like also that ability to survive and move on to the future. So that's what, like that's how I approach this Afrofuturism lane. And I mean, even like the creativity of it as well.
Along with that too, it's like, I always say, it's like it infuses like radical imagination, um, and a understanding of self, um, and those things kind of fuse together because I look at Afrofuturism just as much as foreshadowing as I do when I look at, I mean, yeah, as anything else, as just as much as it's like, this say imaginative, like, world, granted, one day it might be two young kids on on a spacecraft, by all means, like, but at the same time, it's just having this idea, um, of not only faith, but like you have the right to be optimistic, and it's holding on to that understanding that you have that right and exercising that right through any means that you feel that it needs to be exercised. I mean, from a creative, healthy standpoint, but being completely optimistic, like, I mean, granted, not to get political, but the Trump administration was a dumpster fire, especially if you were Black. And it's like, but in order to see, like, you have to be able to see past these next couple months or next couple years or whatever it is. And even now, like, like with the current administration, it's not just being like, okay, like, this is where it stops. It's like, no, being able to see that, like, hey, like, there is going to be a point that, things become different, and how it comes about, that's another thing. But at least having that optimism, and having that understanding of self, and as Marcus put, like, reaching back to the past, connecting back to the past, referencing the past in order to trajectory towards that future is very important. There's an author by the name of, I don't know what you want to call her, goddess by the name of Rashida Phillips, who she wrote a book, and I don't have it in here with me, but it's called Black Quantum Futurism. And in it, she talks about, she does this comparison of like African philosophies on time versus, more like Western philosophies. And she states how, in African philosophy, like, time isn't linear, but it's actually a loop where, you're in this moment in the present, and the past lives in the future lives in the past. Like, what happens in this moment dictates the relationship between the two. So it's like this idea that, like, we have multiple futures in front of us, and it's just these small deviations that we make, depends on which one we get to. So, like, Afrofuturism lives in that, right? Like, having that optimism of knowing that, like, I can attach my past to this future. I can attach my community's past, my people's past, like, all of it, dating thousands of years back. I can attach it to this future that I have in mind. I just have to have this radical love for myself, this understanding of myself and what it is I'm capable of doing and acting on it, yeah. So, like Mark said, at one point, freedom was Afrofuturistic to a slave. You know what I mean? Like Rosa Parks being able to sit whatever she wanted on the bus was Afrofuturism in that moment at one point, So it's not to be just labeled as things that lives in like a science fiction. The sci-fi is kind of a huge part of it, but like, what is sci-fi? Like, just because you don't have like a robot or like you don't have like an X-wing fighter doesn't mean it's not science fiction. So I just I would like to clarify that, because that's a very important thing too, because to even understand, like, Intergalactic Soul and a lot of the work that's being done from Black Panther or whoever, like, it's having an idea of what Afrofuturism is a part of it.
Okay, we have a related question. Megan wanted me to help with some of the questions. I think it's related to some of what you've said, from one of our audience members here. Wendy is asking, can you talk more about how you move through your emotions in reaction to so many egregious events that impact the well-being of Black communities?
Hello, Wendy. And that is a beautifully written, by all means, you're going to have to do my next write-up. That was a beautifully written question. It is I guess to say, I'll start with saying this, with Q, Marcus, and I, like, to be in like a position where you accept the position as a community leader, or like, you want to take on the task of like speaking on behalf of, like, the voiceless per se. It is hard at times, because you do have to sort of detach yourself, not necessarily from emotions. You just have to sort of filter that part out and understand, like, how do I communicate this effectively? Not me just being preachy and just flipping out, and like, because that's one, that's so easy, but two, if I really want to create some sort of level of progress, I put it like this: if I'm having a conversation with a white male, older white male, we're talking about, I don't know, we're talking about the financial income gap. I can flip out and talk about, redlining, and just go into this whole entire rant. My tone could be you know, as whatever I wanted to be. The minute he walks away from this conversation, I lose, because things are fun for him. He's like, you know, whatever. Like I'm gonna go to my, you know, I make 6 figures. You know what I mean? I got a Porsche, whatever. Like I'm living fine. Like I don't have to worry about these things from the police officers that you do. You know, so it's a way of like compartmentalizing your emotions, finding a way on how to, like, whether it's put this on paper or create it whenever a program, like how do I create this in this where you know, that same tone, that same conviction is is portrayed without being preachy, because we all hate we just hate being preached to, like preachy folks, you know what I mean? So it is a joust sometimes between what your emotions and your feelings want you to say, how your emotions and your feelings want you to say it, and then how is it that, and being that sort of like representative, like if I'm gonna create this work, you know, and I'm gonna put this work in this space and be an ambassador, you know, then I have to check myself before I walk through the door, and I have to understand, like, it's a skill that's learned. I'll say that much too. How do I say this, and you know, and say this in a manner where I'm not trying to guilt trip anybody. I'm not trying to come off preachy or make somebody feel bad. You know, that's, you know, it's not even really trying to make people feel uncomfortable. You know, that's not really the goal. It's like, how can I turn this to the most like humane conversation possible, to where this person feels that they can be open with me. They can ask whatever questions they want. They can be honest with me, and we can just have a complete honest situation without judgment, I guess to say. And the artwork does a lot of so the art is sort of like the mediator in between two folks, which is kind of a way that we create it. And the harp on a little bit, not give you the long answer, but comic books have always spearheaded these conversations. You know, like Captain America was based on the Tuskegee experiments, where they were testing syphilis on Black people, essentially. The X-Men is based off the Civil Rights Movement. You know, Magneto's Malcolm X. You know, by any means necessary, I just want my people to be, you know, like, and with Professor X is like, you know, nonviolent. Like, I don't want to hurt the humans. You know, we have to talk to them. We have to, you know, and, you know, like I said, Malcolm X was just like, nah, you know, let's just start slapping people. You know, and he wasn't always like that. But, you know, you get my point, is that those narratives have a way of creating these stories in a way that doesn't come off preachy, that you can digest these things in a way that tastes a lot better. That Marcus had spoke of a metaphor. It was a metaphor he used in the first Intergalactic Soul exhibition, and he was like, you know, raise your hand if you like cheesecake, and you know, and people raise their hand. And he's like, all right, well, we know, like, you need broccoli to live, though, right? Like, you need your vegetables. So, like, our goal is to make your broccoli taste like cheesecake. And essentially, that's what you want to do when it comes to creating the work, and finding that sort of balance in between your emotions. It's like having that mission in mind that, like, okay, like, I'm not gonna just put like Kanye pepper or just broccoli and be like, eat it. Like, no, it's like, how do I make this as digestible as possible? Yeah, and that's my in my opinion, my take.
Thank you. We have a question from a student, Lola. Lola asked a couple questions. One was, what's your most profound memory creating art to inspire others, and what keeps you motivated?
Well, last February when we did the theatrical performance, and you know, like Q said, like, we're trying to put this stuff together. It was like, you know, like I had never did like graphics in a theater before, so trying to like learn that stuff while Q and the band are doing the things. But I remember we did like, what is it called, Q? Like the opening show where we just kind of let people pay what they wanted to pay.
Yeah, pay what you can show. Yeah.
But seeing like us going through that narrative and the artwork popping up and with the music and the live band, seeing like they were like young, like a lady walked out and she was in tears because she thought it was like that powerful to her. That was like one of my favorite moments. And I was just like, man, like again, like it was like it's a fictional story, but like the way that she could relate to like like there's a part in the show where the kids get pulled over by the cops, and like like Q's like expression around that with the artwork, like really had people at like a standing ovation. And I guess like us as creatives, I know especially myself, whenever I'm making stuff, um, it's never good enough for me. Like I never think it's good. I'm always like, it's like this sick disease that I have where I'm always driven to try to make this perfect piece, even though like people are like love it and they respond to it like really well. And like Q was like, Q was always like, yeah, we still getting it together, or like, like this is a crazy story. Like we're saying all of this stuff, but to see like people's reaction and to see them like give us like a standing ovation for something that we thought was like maybe 50% done, but they looked at it at like 1,000%. Like I think that was like very motivating and inspiring for me as well. And then another like real quick, a couple years ago, Jason and we were teaching so we teach a lot of workshops. I teach a ton of workshops from everywhere, from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian to like the McCall Center. And I teach a lot of workshops that revolve around comic books design and expression. How do we express ourselves through like those mediums? And me and Jason were in a workshop where we were working with, they called them like at-risk teens, and like it was a gang prevention workshop. All of these kids were like Bloods. They were all repping Bloods. They were all deemed to be like a step away from prison. Like one kid even had like an ankle, one of those like ankle bracelets on where you're not supposed to leave your house. All of them were 17. They were supposed to be graduating from high school, but they all had been kicked out of high school. And we created this comic book workshop where it was like, hey, like, you want to create a hero, and how do you see yourself as a superhero? And like the first day, all of the kids were like, and these are all Black males, and they were all like not wanting to participate. They were, some of the stories that they were telling us, like we asked them like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And every one of them was like either dead or in prison. That was literally their answer. And it's interesting because I was like, but like my whole thing is Afrofuturism. So you can't talk like that around me, because my whole idea is like seeing us in the future, thriving. And and this was like a month that we did this workshop. Nobody wanted to teach it, but we showed up every Saturday morning. It was at my church. And like, these kids, I remember like leaving that workshop, and like the kids kind of like they started growing onto us, and because representation is important too. Like them seeing people like us showing up in my old neighborhood that's definitely changed, or like the church that I came up in, and I'm like, where I don't even know that there's gang activity in the area now. But a couple months, like that workshop ended, and then a couple months later, one of the kids came back to the McCall. He came to my studio at the McCall, and he was just like, yo, you remember me? I'm one of the kids from the it was called the GAP program, Gang Anti-Prevention, something like that. And he's like, yo, you remember me? Like, you came in and you taught us like how to turn ourselves into superheroes. I was like, yeah. Like, I was like, how you doing? He was like, and this is the kid with the ankle arrest bracelet on. And he was just kind of like, man, I just want to thank y'all for coming by that workshop. He's like, I just turned my whole life around. He was like, because of you, you and Jason, and it was another cat, Wally. He was like, because of y'all coming through, like like I decided to go into a career of design and web development, and now I'm like in my first year of college, and like seeing like that impact right there. And I'm always joking about people about don't you ever go into a design career because it sucks. But like I'm always joking or like art. I'm like, don't be an artist. Like, but yeah, like seeing that, like, and he came in and hugged me, I think that meant like a lot. Seeing like they had counted him all the way out, like they counted him out. He didn't even believe in himself. But then to look at like this, and to go back on the question earlier about how do we check our emotions and like this idea of art, like I've really started looking at this art that we do as like is how it serves a purpose, and it connects and it engages with the community. Is more than just like an expression. It's more than like like if I'm emotional today, if I want to go scribble some stuff on some canvas, that stuff is important. But I also know that side of like how it can affect people, how it can affect communities, and it's so impactful and powerful to me that like we created like a fictional story that turned this whole kid's life around, and a bunch of those kids too, and like all of those kids are doing like pretty well now just because they saw us show up to that class. So I think that was one of like my moments that let me know like that was like a life-changing moment for me right there.
I had there's a bunch of moments like that. I mean, sometimes it's even like when you're dealing with like adults, like you have a conversation with somebody, and then like next thing you know, you kind of see their opinions sort of change, like them become more receptive, them being able to listen more, like even things like that. I mean, it's just like the impact of it's huge. We recently just finished up a mural project on the west side of Charlotte. Um, and I got like this love-hate relationship with like doing murals. But we did this mural, and that day, the day we were doing the mural right across the street, this sort of like, would you say they're project housing, Marcus? It's like a duplex. That's
I
not
think
necessarily
it's just
project.
low income. Yeah.
Yeah. But hey, beside the fact, there was like these five little girls outside that were playing, and one of them it was her birthday. So anyway, so they're playing, and of course, like they see adults like painting. They come over and they're like, they want to help and stuff. And mind you, it's like this fence between us, and we had to sign like an insurance waiver because the property is just kind of like, yeah, the property is a lot going on per se. But anyway, she asked, could they help? And I was like, unfortunately you can't. But I was like, I'll do you a favor. I'll put a star on the mural for each one of you. So I asked them what their names was, and I was like, all right, like, where do you want your stars at? And they were like, yeah, they pointed to like, up in this part of the mural. And I said, okay. I was like, I'm gonna put your star there. Like, so when every time you see it, like you understand, like this is your mural. And like, so the first thing I did, I went to Marcus, was like, yo, man, I need that lift. Because if I forget to put these stars up, I'm not going to forgive myself. So like, I really got the lift. I put the stars up. And this is probably maybe like 3 hours later. I don't know, like they had went in the house, but they came back out, and like their reaction when they saw like these, I mean, it was literally like just like a couple lines, you know what I mean? But you would have thought I just handed them like the lease to the building. It's like, hey, it's yours. Like they completely flipped out. And you just understand of like just the smallest little gestures of it can go a very long way, especially when it comes to public art, because it belongs to the public. Like I'm at this point, like, yeah, this is our idea. It has this intergalactic soul concept, but it doesn't belong to us. Like we're handing it over to the community. This is for them, and we hope that when they see it, they see themselves. And just seeing like the reaction from those like five little girls, like I mean, like again, I mean, it just it just sort of like does something to you. They were just like, oh my gosh, they're calling their mom. Their mom is like, the mom's getting pissed because they got the door open, and like it's like let the air conditioned out, like. But like, yo, just I mean, literally, it was like 5 stars, maybe 4 lines on each one with a paintbrush, and it just totally made it. But the idea that now every time when these little girls pass this mural, they see those stars and they're like, yo, this is this represents me. I connect with this. Like, I'm part of this. That goes a very, very, very long way when you're creating art that serves.
All right, and I think we're running out of time because it's so good. We just wanted to keep going, but I guess last question for tonight is also from Lola. Do you have any book or documentary recommendations?
I was just gonna say, in the realm of Afrofuturism, anything by Octavia Butler is always a go-to. Parable of the Sower is one of my favorites, and in my favorite book, I just love this book, and it's kind of futurism, but Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison is always my go-to as well.
But I have like a list of like books, movies, other artwork by other artists. Like Kerry James Marshall did a series called Rhythm Master, which is like this super Afrofuturistic type, like this Afrofuture exhibition. And ironically enough, it was actually a sequential story. But yeah, and I can't say I'm all inspired by it, but it's very good examples and reference of like the past and present. Because there's a lot of, you may hear or see from the past and you don't necessarily connect it with Afrofuturism, but like, like Earth, Wind and Fire, they were very much Afrofuturistic.
Exactly. George Clinton.
George Clinton, like, but you would never really think that. But when you go and actually look at the visuals and the things that, like the costumes, everything down, the aesthetics, you're like, man, this is like Afrofuturistic 100%. So, there's not one in particular thing I can point to and say like, yeah, I will say as far as books, I think the whole like Black Quantum Futurism series by Rashida Phillips, it is very heavy because she's like, to my understanding, she's like a physics major. So some of the stuff is just like, like just completely over my head. But like going through it and pulling out the things you can understand, and especially the fact that a lot of it builds on like African philosophies, it is an awesome reference to, as far as like, I guess to say things that especially now I've been creating in my work.
Thank you all again for coming. I really enjoyed it. This was a fantastic time. We hope that you join us again on Thursday. Otherwise, you all, have a good night. We hope you take away some great things from this. Thank y'all so much.